Thank you. My new book is $160, whereas Philip's book is a lazy $25. So make sure you get your copy today. So thanks so much for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to follow in Muriel's footsteps. She and I have supervised a couple of PhD students together, and with Muriel, we are in the presence of greatness. So I've always said that anyway. So I want to start by saying a few words about Philip and why he's so qualified to write about this topic. I should wear my glasses too. I tried large print and it's not large enough. Okay. I first encountered Philip's work as an undergraduate in the early 1990s while I was taking Gary Baumer's new Sociology of Religion class at Monash University. As I began to explore the field, Philip Hughes stood out as the leading figure documenting religious change in Australia. Whenever I searched for data or analysis or insight, his name, and at that time he was senior researcher at the Christian Research Association, his name was everywhere, and I drew on his work in my honours thesis and again in my PhD. I finally got to meet Philip when we started working together on the Spirit of Generation Y project in the early 2000s, which was the first national study of youth and religion in Australia. And I still, even if I say so myself, it's still regarded as the benchmark study of young people and religion in this country, even if I say so myself. I'm very grateful to Philip and colleagues, including Professor Ruth Webber, who's here with us today, that they invited me to participate on that project. Back then I was a young academic, and I am still younger than them today, but I am getting older. And I was making my way in the quantitative sociology of religion, and I'm deeply grateful to the things I learnt from them. We also spent a lot of time conceptualising spirituality and how we might study that, and that's something that shaped my work ever since. Back then, as now, it's evident that Philip has outstanding research and interpretive skills. He's got a deep knowledge of the literature on religious change. He's read all the work. He's got a capacity to design excellent surveys himself and also conduct rigorous analysis. He's also got long-standing connections with religious communities all around Australia. He also had, and he still has, a strong sense of what religion means in the lives of ordinary believers. But probably what I've admired most about Philip over the years is his astonishing knowledge of the census. Using the census, he's mapped religious change and the shifting dynamics of religious communities in Australia for decades. In this, Philip has no peer, and I say that unequivocally. He has no peer. That is what makes this book so exciting and so helpful. Australia needed a comprehensive but accessible account of what's happening to religion here. In Britain, they've got Callum Brown and his fantastic book, The Death of Christian Britain, alongside work by Linda Woodhead and Grace Davey. I recommend those books. In the United States, they've got Robert Wuthnow, who's written extensively on religious change. Our much missed colleague, Gary Baumer, who worked with Philip on occasions, gave us a book called Australian Soul in 2006. It's a good book full of great insights and data, although I always felt it was a little unfinished, and I'm sure Gary would delight in Philip's book, and I think it's the kind of coda that Australian Soul needed. More recently, Adam Possamai and David Tittensaw have written Religion and Change in Australia, and it's a great contribution to understanding certain aspects of religious change, particularly religion in the media, religious nuns, that is, people who have no religious identity, and also new religious movements. But there was still a gap, a need for a grounded and accessible account of the long arc of Christian decline. In 1966, a sociologist at the Australian National University called Hans Moll conducted the first major study of religion in Australia, and it was called Religion in Australia. And it revealed that Christianity back then in 1966 had a profound impact on people's lives at that time. Almost everyone identified as a Christian. Many people attended church. Almost half the population was coming into contact with the church at least once or twice a year, and most people believed in God. Back then in the 1960s, Christianity also functioned as a kind of civil religion. It was woven into public life and into broader social expectations. Now, the decline of Christianity in Australia has been noted very often, but I don't think it has been as explained as comprehensively and as clearly in this book, What is Happening to Religion in Australia. It's the first to present the topic in a way that lay readers, students and scholars can understand. Philip charts the fall using census data, surveys and personal insight. And he handles these data with peerless skill. I'm someone who does quantitative research all the time in sociology of religion. When I see Philip's work, I think, yep, he's got it right. But it's more than just about statistics. He links numbers to experience and telling stories of churches that he knows from the inside. The book examines several key forces driving religious change, not seven, because I'll be going for ages. I'm going to talk about three of the things he identifies. The first is secularisation, which is something that Muriel touched on. The move away from religious authority, religious belief and religious practice. Philip explains that this isn't just about people drifting away from faith. It's about how contemporary life has become more complex and differentiated. We no longer need religion to explain illness or the weather or how society stitches together. We rely on doctors, science, education and technology. And these systems have become central to everyday life. And so religion has receded into the background as a way of making meaning. Relatedly, another key force driving this change is changing values. Older generations in Australia were shaped by a sense of duty to family, to God, to community. Younger generations, as Philip explains, place more emphasis on things like personal fulfilment, autonomy and choice. And this shift has undermined institutions like the church, which have traditionally relied on loyalty, conformity and inherited values and beliefs. It also helps explain why so many young Australians now describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. That's a catchphrase that makes more sense to people who are not necessarily grounded in religious authority. Philip also talks about generational change, and I think this is especially where we need to pay attention and aligns closely with my own thinking about the causes of religious change in Australia. In terms of generational change, as a Generation Xer, I witnessed this firsthand. I grew up as an Anglican in Doncaster and Kew in the 1970s and 1980s. And I experienced how church life and suburban life were deeply intertwined. My 1970s Sunday school had hundreds of kids, or at least that's how I remember it. I can ask my mum if it's indeed true there were hundreds of kids. Good, I'm not making it up. There was Church of England Boys Society, there was family picnics, church camps. It was a kind of whole ecosystem of Christian belonging. As a teenager in the 1980s, I was part of a large evangelical Anglican youth group that provided a genuine connection for hundreds of teens and young adults. But the winds of change were already blowing. Sunday football, movies, shopping, all of these things began to decenter religion from everyday life for younger Australians. The youngest generation is raised in this individualistic context and have fewer personal, familial and communal connections to organised religion. So then, why would they ever bother to turn to church for fulfilment, direction or meaning? The Christian faith is as unfamiliar to the youngest generations as TikTok is to the oldest generations. I asked my 22-year-old to explain to me TikTok last night and he's just like shaking his head and, Dad, it's too late, that ship has sailed. Philip's work isn't just about Christianity. He's long been our most perceptive observer of the entire religious landscape in Australia. So in this book, he also talks about the role of immigration in religious change. Religious diversity has increased and immigration has fostered the profound growth of Hindu, Muslim, Sikh and Buddhist communities in Australia. He does note, though, that whilst these other faiths are growing, they're still subject to the same kind of long-term social forces that affect all religious groups. Islam is a case in point. There's a global revival in piety and increased public prominence. But even here, this apparent vitality can be misleading. With each younger generation, the secularising forces in Australia are growing more substantial across the board. Like Philip, I believe the shift away from religion transcends all traditions. What appears to be growth today may well mask decline tomorrow. Philip also asks why some denominations are declining more than others. Mainline and progressive churches, including Anglican, Uniting and traditional Protestant denominations, have struggled the most. This is something that Muriel talked about. These churches have tended to mirror societal values more closely, but in doing so, they've lost some of the distinctiveness that gave them identity and purpose. There's an old axiom in the sociology of religion, and it goes that strict churches are stronger churches. So therefore, by contrast, the most conservative groups, including Pentecostal churches, experienced rapid growth in the 1980s through to the mid-2000s and have since managed to maintain their population share. Their stronger internal identities, strong beliefs and emotionally charged worship have been especially appealing to younger people seeking meaning and connection. But as Philip notes, this growth often comes with a high turnover. Many attend for a few years before drifting away. So all of this might sound very bleak for the faithful, but in the final chapter, Philip asks how churches can respond, and he doesn't offer false hope. He's realistic, but he's not defeatist. He sees potential in churches that shift focus away from institutional survival towards hospitality, intergenerational connection, community life, and spiritual depth. That's a message that feels familiar, durable, and timeless. It's a consistent Christian message for 2 millennia. To summarise, what makes Philip's book so valuable is his easy command of the data and his ability to translate complex knowledge into a readable and accessible account. It's grounded, clear, and insightful. And I was very excited to read it, and I was delighted to endorse it. So if you want to understand what's happening to religion in Australia, not just anecdotally, but in facts, this is the book to read. So congratulations, Philip, and thank you for giving us the book that we needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Muriel and Andrew. This book is not primarily about the figures. I published them earlier in the CRA publication on religious and non-religious profiles. But it's about the interpretation. It's about what they mean, primarily. And as has been said, the book doesn't offer a lot of good news. There's likely to be further decline. The rate of decline in the Uniting Anglican Lutheran and some of the other churches is quite considerable. In churches like the Baptists and Pentecostals, it's happening, but at 1/10 of the rate. And those churches are likely to be buoyant in some places, although on the margins of society over the next 100 years, perhaps. And we acknowledge that with every loss there is pain and there is grief. Perhaps the good news that I was trying to get over is that it's certainly not your fault or anyone's fault. It's a universal pattern. American scholars a decade or so ago were raising questions as to whether it was just a European phenomenon. America was different. But certainly secularization in America is very evident these days, and the data that I've read is that America is secularizing at a greater rate than any country in the world. Africa is the most religious continent, but even there decline is being measured. It's interesting that the most religious places on earth in terms of traditional religion are also the poorest. Afghanistan, Yemen, Sudan. The contribution of this book is to explain something of all that the changes are actually rooted in these fundamental changes in our society, from those, as Andrew was describing, a deep sense of duty to family and nation, to seeking personal fulfillment. And that change is rooted in medical technology, which has vastly improved rates of children surviving childhood and providing reliable contraception, to other changes are that children are now a 25-year investment with low returns rather than a 5 to 8 year investment with high returns for the family. And the final factor that the scholars point to is the development of good national welfare systems, which provide a fallback if life does not go too well. Incidentally, personal fulfillment, our dominant value in our society now, does not necessarily mean selfish individualism. As most people know that fulfillment comes through contributing to the lives of others, but it can lead to selfishness. But the idea of the book is that through understanding these changes, so we can better decide how we will respond. We can reject the social changes and the new values and seek to distinguish ourselves from them. That response leads to a small impact in the larger population, but preserves the distinctiveness of faith. Or we can embrace the changes and work through the consequences. For most of us, our response will probably be somewhere in between. There are values of inclusiveness that we now want to embrace, and the fears and superstitions of past generations that we want to eschew. But there will be certain principles we want to hold on to, principles of unconditional love, of justice and mercy. We want to reject selfishness and embrace community. In the last month, I've read a book of one of the lecturers here, Sally Douglas, and it happens that that book was also published by Coventry Press, and Sally's been in ministry and is very aware of that changing context in which we live. While I've focused on the changing context, she's focused on the responses to it. As little groups of people have formed inclusive community, supporting each other, showing love and working for justice. And she points to the church not being a triumphant pillar of society, but existing in the little acts of kindness and grace, justice and mercy as salt for the community. Her book's at the back there too. And I think it's a good supplement to some of the things I have to say. There's another book recently published by another person here at the college, Kerry Handyside, who in a different way seeks to find the reflections of Christ in the diverse ways in the Australian context. Again, a different but positive response to the increasing secularisation of our society. I've sometimes framed the changes that we experience as a new axial age, comparable to the changes that the Jewish community experienced when they were in exile in Babylon. Huge changes occurred then in the whole ways in which faith was expressed when they couldn't, in fact, worship in the temple as they had done in previous times. Over the years, I've looked at how the Christian faith has been re-expressed, reconceived in different contexts and cultures. My doctoral research was how that has happened in Thailand. We are now in a different cultural context to the one in which I grew up. And it's time to ask, in this new context, how those Christian traditions might be re-expressed. Darryl Jackson, who is principal of Whitley College, read the draft of the book and made the comments that we will not all agree with the solutions that are presented in it. I hope that this book is not taken as the answer, but as some analysis which poses the questions for which there may well be a range of answers. I want to express my thanks to people who shared something of that journey over many years. the people at the Christian Research Association, the Alpha Crucis at Pilgrim, 9 students that I've supervised for their doctorates in the past 8 years have all looked to positive engagements with society through welfare, chaplaincy, through creating more inclusive communities in which there is no place for abuse or exclusion. I want to thank Muriel Poulter. Initially, she said to me after a presentation a little less than a year ago that the material that I presented there should be in the form of an accessible book. She had some role in shaping the nature of this book, although I must take responsibility for the content. And I'm very grateful for her encouragement, for her help in shaping it, and grateful for her comments this evening. And from time to time, I've had discussions with Andrew in the last few years, and we found ourselves agreeing on a number of areas about our perceptions as to what is happening to religion in Australia. And Andrew's become one of the most prominent sociologists of religion in Australia and has done some really important research projects. And I've valued the conversations and I'm grateful for his affirmation today. Robert Cram was a member of my first church back in North Carlton 50 years ago. He became an agricultural economist at Queensland University, but we've continued to have conversations about faith, and I've valued those conversations. He read a draft of the book and raised a number of significant questions that I then had to grapple with. And I've worked closely with Bob Dixon. He gives his apology for not being here today. He's on a plane at the moment. He's an excellent proofreader and never hesitates to ask the hard questions from a thoughtful Catholic perspective as well. And he's challenged me over some areas of content and encouraged me to nuance some other things as well as correcting some mistakes. Bob, who apologises for the fact that he can't be here, has asked me where I am in the book. And certainly the book does express something of my own journey. And the journey of millions of other people in Australia and the Western world is a journey in which the nature and of expression of faith has changed. For me, it's changed since my childhood. And yet, some basic values have changed little. The values of community, of finding meaning and contributing to the lives of others, creating a world of justice and compassion. And I hope that what the book finally does is encourage us to look at how we can do that today.
Anyway, I'm here from Coventry Press with my colleague Michael. When I looked at the books that Michael had brought along, including Kathy's and a few others, I really felt quite proud of the list that Coventry Press is producing over the years. It's a difficult business to be in, as you could imagine. Fewer people are buying books. Readers are getting older, but nevertheless, we have a commitment to contributing to the life of the churches in Australia and New Zealand. And I do encourage you to buy copies not only of this book, but of all the books that are there on the tables. I'm also always looking for authors, and especially authors who take seriously the issues that are raised in this book. How does the Jesus of Nazareth tradition survive if the churches are in decline? And when I come to the area of decline, I realize that Muriel Porter and I were in our own way a little bit responsible for that decline. Not personally, of course, but because when we first met many years ago, we were both working for an organization called the Joint Board of Christian Education that many of you would remember. Now, the Joint Board had been in existence for about 100 years, a combination of the various Methodist and Presbyterian churches in Australia and New Zealand, and its primary function was to publish resources for Sunday schools in both countries. When I joined JBCE, there were staff about 25. When I left, there were 3 of us. An indication of the decline of Sunday schools in the research that has been going on. So I commend the book. I join with my colleagues in commending it. I wish Philip well, congratulate him on the book, and I declare that it is launched. Thank you.